absolutely delighted to be here. This is a very exciting conference. And I'm thrilled to have just listened to John, because it's reminded me how much I've owed my work to his work over many years. And that gives me a good way of introducing my talk. I need to say something about myself. I am a school teacher by origin and was a geography teacher. I've always considered myself a subject specialist teacher. And so I want to open up a conversation with some of John's remarks, because although I agree with it about 90%, I do have a problem as a subject specialist teacher about a curriculum that might become too learner-centred. I've learnt over the years in my career that balance is everything. I also want to say that I've been involved in the secondary education textbook project here in Astana, and my talk this afternoon arises out of that work to some extent, because one of the things we are grappling with as we design and create new textbooks with Kazakhstani teachers is the balance of subject content and pedagogic design. And it takes a lot of hard work. So, I'm a bit too quick. So my aim, what I would like to do is to make an argument for a progressive, knowledge-led curriculum. And in so doing, I want to distinguish the features of what I'm going to be calling a three alternative futures heuristic. Say something more about that later. And I'll be focusing on the special significance of my remarks on teacher development, something I call curriculum leadership. But as a school teacher, I always wanted to start with the question, who are the children we teach? Who are these people in front of me? What knowledge do they come into the classroom with? Who are they? How am I going to get to know them? And I think there, I and John agree totally. We have to know our children. But what I want to know also, as a subject specialist teacher, is what role does education play in preparing the children I teach for this day and age, for the 21st century. And as a subject specialist teacher, I want to know what I teach. So what do you teach that helps make a distinctive contribution to the educated person? And enable these young people to face the future as confident and capable human beings. I would say those questions have been the guiding questions for my entire career as a school teacher and as a teacher, educator and researcher subsequently. It would help if I could change my slide. Yes. So to begin, I want to just acknowledge some contemporary challenges we face today. Face today in a way that 40 years ago, when I started my career as a teacher, maybe didn't exist so much. And I have three headings. First, we do live in this digital age. Information is everywhere. It's available all the time. And with computing technologies, it is extraordinary what we can do with that information very quickly. as a school teacher, I need to acknowledge that. But also, I'm aware that there are some global issues around today that are very, very extreme, and I think research shows they impinge on young people's minds. For example, asymmetric warfare and terror across the world. Climate change, obviously. And I think unregulated capitalism across the world, creating enormous inequalities in wealth and opportunity amongst people. And finally, culture shifts. The 3-minute culture that we are said to live in. That is a reference to the concentration span of the average person these days. I read recently an article that 3 minutes is now more like 90 seconds. But also the culture of celebrities and selfies, where everyone can be famous for at least 15 minutes with the help of Facebook and other things. And social media tyranny, where young people are in fact by social media under enormous pressure to perform and present themselves in certain ways. Now, as a school teacher, I have to be aware of those contemporary challenges, and so do education systems. And there are lots of solutions around. Global competitiveness has put us all in what my Prime Minister calls a global race, where we tighten up the measurements so that we can be sure that we're competing successfully. And every education system I know, including Kazakhstan, is in the middle of reform. And innovation is the big word. We have to constantly innovate. But I think there are other solutions to these contemporary challenges, and I put those under the heading that I've stolen from Gerd Biester, who coined the term learnification, where a lot of curricula are becoming more and more skills-based and organised around outcomes and outputs and transversal competencies, where we're told that our job as teachers is to build the learning power of students, helping them learn to learn. We should focus on their creativity, and we should, wherever we can, personalise the curriculum to suit individuals with their different requirements and different talents. I want to be sceptical about this. Many people will have seen Ken Robinson's TED Talks available on the internet. When I last looked it up, 35 million people have seen his lecture on creativity. And I agree with Ken Robinson that the students we meet demand respect. That's how I started my talk. This is Ken Robinson speaking. Students are born with extraordinary powers of imagination, intelligence, feeling, intuition, spirituality, and of physical and sensory awareness. But I disagree with some of his conclusions. There's a quotation on the right there where he says, "We are educating people out of their creative capacities." I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. I disagree with that conclusion profoundly. As a school teacher, I find it a little insulting that my work is so damaging. So I want to be sceptical about learning to learn, where learning is regarded as just a good thing in itself. If we've got students learning, that's great. Well, hang on, because learning can be trivial, it can be dangerous, it could be wrong. So learning itself is not an outcome. I think learnification and too much emphasis on learning also can cause us to treat it as a scientific, technical process. As if we just adopted the right technique, we could speed it up, we could accelerate it, as if learning quickly was a desirable thing to do. Well, it may not be, because some things that are important to learn are difficult and take time. They can be counterintuitive. They require sustained, painstaking effort. And also, too much emphasis on learning as an outcome can undermine teachers. Teachers become subservient to the learning. They don't lead the learning. So teachers describe themselves as facilitators of learning, not as teachers. I think each of those is a dangerous thing. And my feeling is that all young people have the pedagogic right to acquire knowledge, valuable knowledge, and the means, the ability to think theoretically and in the abstract, to sometimes to be able to discern better knowledge and better arguments, and to be able to make good generalizations. And it's that belief that I've held for a long, long time, which has led me to this notion of powerful knowledge, which is a term coined by Michael Young at my university in London. And I haven't got time to describe how he's come to that term, but it's an interesting story. But powerful knowledge refers to the knowledge that children and young people, and also you and me, are unlikely to acquire at home or in the workplace or in the shopping centre or from the TV or by accident. In other words, powerful knowledge probably needs to be taught. Powerful knowledge is knowledge that pupils will need if they are to become active citizens and workers in a complex modern world. That is, remember, their pedagogic right to be able to think in these powerful ways. I came across a very good example of how powerful knowledge works from a novel by the novelist Sebastian Faulks in 2012, where he described a woman who he described in the novel as the most ignorant woman in the district of France where she lived. And this was 200 years ago. But it's the way he described this woman that I found interesting. She understood so little of the material world, how water boiled, why a walnut fell from the tree, that she had to take almost everything on trust. She was an orphan, she was poor, she could not read nor write, and so she was able just to greet each day as a new experience and had no capacity to think beyond that experience. And that is a good way to illustrate how powerful knowledge works and why it's important. From Michael Young's writing, I've tried to define powerful knowledge in a series of points. It is often evidence-based. It is almost always abstract or theoretical. In other words, it's conceptual, it's about ideas, it's not facts. It's almost always part of a wider system of thought. That is very important. It's not discrete individual facts. It's something that connects together. It's dynamic, it's evolving, and it's changing, but quite reliable. The point about being changing is very important, because although it's reliable, powerful knowledge is always open to challenge and therefore discussion. Powerful knowledge is often counterintuitive. In other words, it's not common sense. We often have to be taught it. And it exists whether we know it or not. It exists outside of our direct experience. And what Michael Young will say, and probably would have put on the top of the list, powerful knowledge is usually specialized. In fact, he would say it was almost always specialized in subjects which are not arbitrary or accidental or transient. They're there for a long time, like science, history, and geography, and so on. And I find this an intriguing idea. And it's led me to the fundamental question which really has driven my interest in education for 40 years. What is the school curriculum for? And my answer is that it is the pedagogic right of all young people that they have access to this specialized knowledge, this powerful knowledge. It is their right to be taught how to encounter the earth as an object of disciplined thought. Remember Jean, she had no equipment, mental equipment to do that. This right gives people the possibility to engage with the world beyond their experience, the concepts, the theories, and the ideas that make the subject's systematicity the thing that knits it together as a subject. And this ability to think through that disciplined thought and maybe, as I said earlier, discern better arguments. To think geographically, what does that mean? To think historically, to think scientifically, artistically, musically. So this brings us to the notion of curriculum futures, because I have found over quite a few years now that if I argue for a subject-based curriculum which values disciplined knowledge, I get accused of being old-fashioned, anti-progressive, and not in touch with the modern world. And I think that is wrong, because I am against what Michael Young and colleagues call a Future One, an F1 curriculum, which is the curriculum I think many of us are familiar with, because it's the curriculum that we may have encountered in school ourselves. It's where a given body of knowledge is decided by somebody and delivered to us as if it was uncontroversial and finished and stable. That is grossly under-socialized knowledge, and it's not the kind of curriculum that I'm arguing for. It is a heavily fact-based curriculum which puts a heavy emphasis on memory. That's not what I'm arguing for. Because that curriculum is so unpopular and absolutely redundant in this day and age, the future alternative is often the F2 curriculum, which, as I said earlier in my talk, is based around skills and competencies where subject divisions are considered to be totally artificial and transient and up for discussion. The emphasis is on experiential learning, and this is considered by Michael Young and colleagues as being grossly over-socialized. It's as if the only knowledge possible was the knowledge created in the classroom on Wednesday morning or whenever. So a future 3 curriculum is where subjects are considered not as given, as in F1, but not arbitrary either, as in F2. An F3 curriculum is driven by knowledge, it's led by knowledge, but it's led by knowledge in terms of the epistemic rules of specialist discipline communities, which are dedicated to provide ways to understand the world and to take young people beyond their everyday experience. An F3 curriculum must be discursive. It must have an element of negotiation. It must respect the knowledge in the child's head already. But the teacher must be prepared to teach a set of ideas and principles and introduce children to the arguments and the disputes of that subject community, whether it be science or history or geography. So what does a future 3 curriculum look like? Well, in terms of the secondary education textbook project that I've been working on in Astana, I hope a lot of our textbooks, our new textbooks, will display some principles of a future 3 curriculum. It is definitely knowledge-led. It is based upon this idea of powerful disciplinary knowledge, which enables what Chris Winch, the philosopher, called epistemic assent, or what Michael Young would call better thinking. It is progressive because it's motivated by social justice. It is the pedagogic right of all children to gain some access to specialised thinking. All children, not just the academic few. An F3 curriculum distinguishes curriculum as an idea from pedagogy. In other words, the curriculum question, which for me is the what shall I teach question, is in the ascendancy. And what follows that are the pedagogic selections that must be fit for purpose. If this is what I want to teach, how am I best going to do it? But there are some considerable challenges if we want to create a future 3 curriculum. One good question is, who owns powerful knowledge? If we agree about powerful knowledge, who owns it? Where is it? Where do we get it? A second question is, can the state, or maybe a textbook, codify powerful knowledge into a set of principles, like a curriculum document or something? Well, you may tell by the tone of my voice that I think the answer to that question is no. It is not possible just to list the powerful knowledge in history or geography or science. Powerful knowledge is something bigger than a set of contents or a set of facts. So who owns it? Well, it's owned by the disciplines. And therefore, I think school teachers, whether they're teachers of science or art or history, need to have a relationship with that specialised subject discipline. And so my final bullet point, what are the roles and responsibilities of teachers in bringing a future 3 curriculum into fruition, is a very tricky question indeed, because the role and the responsibility is very large. And we've heard a lot in this conference already about how school teachers need time to think, they need time to research, they need time to build that relationship with the subject contents that they're teaching. And that's where I'm finishing.